Hey everyone, I'm Josh Loftus, and this is the Everyday Monday podcast, the podcast where we talk about everyday people doing everyday things in everyday churches. Whether you're a pastor, a plumber, or that overzealous parent at the Little League baseball games, we all know who that is. This podcast is for you. This is where we find value in the trenches of Christian life. Welcome to Everyday Monday. And in the trenches with me today, I have a very special guest. He is the pastor at Communion Church in the wilds of Mt Vernon, Washington. And I have enjoyed getting to know him over the past couple months. I have Pastor Jim Fikkert with me today. Jim, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. Yep, thanks for being on. Well, before we get going, it is the third and final installment of our sponsorship with RefTunes. For those of you who have not heard up until this point, RefTunes is a series by a guy named Paul Cox exploring church history through comics. It's really, really fantastic. If you guys have seen our Facebook banner, our podcast art, he is the guy that did that. He's an amazing artist. Takes really, really cool scenes from church history, put some awesome quotes to them. You guys got to go check him out, reftunes.com. He's on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at reftunes. And if you guys are interested or know anybody that is interested in sponsoring the podcast, get your name out there or your work out there, shoot us an email at everydaymondaydpodcast@gmail.com or any of the socials. We are on there as well. So, all right, moving on to our guest, Jim. Give us, before we get going here, man, just kind of a short bio of who you are and what you do, maybe a little known fun fact, if you have one. Not many people do, but just give us a little bit about you, man.
Yeah, so live in Mount Vernon. I'm about to celebrate 15 years with my lovely wife, Esther. And
congrats.
We have 6 kids, so 13-year-old, 11-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 7-year-old, and an almost 2-year-old.
So you got nothing but time.
Right, and I'm not going to give you their names because the Russians might be listening. So
yes, we are using Google Chrome.
Yes, we'll leave it there. Fun fact, what most people recognize about me very quickly is I'm not a small person. I'm about 6'7", yes. 250 pounds, and I am not nearly the tallest person in my extended family. So lots of tall Dutch people all around me. So
yeah. How does that work in counseling sessions, right? Like when you have like the cocky knucklehead guy coming in needing counseling, and there you are, 6'7".
It works well. It works very well. I mean, all those power moves of like the handshake and I don't need any of those. It's basically just stand up and it does the job.
You're in the room and you are automatically the authority.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. So Jim, obviously pastor up there at Communion Church. Give us just really quick how you got into that. Whether ministry was something that you knew you were going into, or if that's something that God kind of slapped you upside the head with, as he does some people. And then what is both the hardest part and the best part of being a pastor up there in Mt Vernon?
Yeah. So no, I did not want to be a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My dad was a Christian school principal who also was an elder in the church. And so I had a good idea of what a pastor was and what a pastor did, and for that reason wanted nothing to do with it. I went and got a master's degree in architecture, and that was what I was planning on doing for the rest of my life. Yeah. I just started serving in the church. A small church plant, and then started doing a little bit more, and then said yes to something else, and then they asked me to consider eldership, and I said no. And then for me, what really kind of motivated me to think through, okay, well maybe I should consider this, is that idea of to whom much is given, much is expected, and I had so much taught to me and built into me, and kind of family around me that showed me what being a Christian was like. And I realized I had all of this that God had given me, and I really probably shouldn't just hoard it and use it to be uber critical of everybody around me, and use it to measure their faith. So stepped into that and became an elder at the church, and then eventually they talked me into preaching, and then eventually I went on staff, and then Yeah, it was just kind of one thing after another that led to planting a church up here in Mount Vernon about 8 years ago. And I tell people all the time, if God had shown me where that path was going, I probably would not have been willing to take the first step because it was not an end that I wanted. But every single one of those decisions made sense. And so and now that I'm on the other side of it, I can look back and go, I can see all these things in my life that where God was preparing me for this. So I guess now I'm officially a pastor. For a while, I'd tell people that I was an architect who was working in the church, but after a certain amount of time, you take those caveats off. So best and worst parts of the job. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be able to be right there and kind of having a front row seat to what God is doing. To be able to see lives changed, to see marriages healed, to see just kind of the beauty of God working in the everyday. And so I get to be invited into a lot of situations that other people don't. And so they don't get to see a lot of the things that as a pastor I get to see. And so for me, that is just deepen my faith more and more as you just see God working in so many different situations and so many different lives.
Yeah.
But with that is the hardest part of the job. You also have front row seat to human depravity. I think, I have friends who are firemen or police officers or work in hospitals. They see a certain kind of depravity. But it's really interesting to walk beside people who seem to have it all together, and then you get to see behind the scenes and see the just massive insecurity and brokenness, or the marriage that everyone thinks is great, but they confide in you as to what it really is. And so sometimes just walking around with that weight is the hardest part of the job, where you just what's going on with everybody. The person who has told you that they're having suicidal thoughts, and you're sitting there worried that something might happen, and how did what I said today, how is that going to affect them? Some of that weight is certainly the hardest part of the job.
Yeah. No, I hear you, man. Yeah, for sure. Now, how long have you been the pastor up there in Communion?
So I've been a pastor for just over 10 years. So I was ordained about 10 years ago. Planted the church in September of 2011. So we're coming up on our 8-year anniversary in September.
Awesome. Now, if you had to, I realize it might be hard just to pick just one, but if you had to narrow down one aspect of your church up there at Communion, the church that the Lord has you a part of, that you really appreciate, really value, like the one thing that would, if you came through the doors today, the one thing that would keep you coming through the doors, what would that aspect about your church be for you?
The pastor. No, I'm kidding.
The European giant behind the pulpit.
Oh yeah, if that doesn't bring you back, no.
If that doesn't bring you back, I don't know what's going to. Welcome to the freak show, people.
Yeah.
What do you want? What
Seriously.
more do you want? I'm here.
What more do you want? No. I think one of the beautiful things about our church is you truly have people striving to bring these eternal ideas of the gospel into this temporary world, and so really struggling to figure out, what does it look like to love my neighbor when they are not nice to me, and they don't really appreciate the love that I'm giving to them, and they don't really care that I am making this effort, or how do we strive for mutual submission in a marriage when there's sin still there, and you're basically opening yourself up to hurt? It's this biblical big idea, but in the everyday world, it's hard. And so, to have people who are really trying to figure out what does that look like, and struggling through it. And so I think that's kind of the beauty of what we have going on here in Mount Vernon.
Yeah. Well, then when that's there, that causes the community and the accountability and the encouragement just to be so much deeper.
Yeah.
Right. Because that automatically, if that mentality is there, it by necessity takes it out of the superficial realm.
Yeah.
Right. It requires that you go deep. It requires that you invest. It requires that you open yourself up to accountability. Right. That's that is so needed, right?
Yeah. Well, in all honesty, there's some people who come to our church who are freaked out a little bit because they're not used to some of this stuff being on the surface. So we'll just talk about conflict. We'll talk about things that are going on in a pretty open way. And for some people, it's just kind of like, wow, your church is really messed up.
It's like, well, no, we're just honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe a little bit of both, but
yeah, which is fair.
Yeah. But for some people, it's just that that is not a comfortable thing. And so it does take some getting used to, I think. And but yeah, it's beautiful once you kind of have that culture is there, because then when people do enter in, even if they're uncomfortable with it at first, in time they realize like, this is actually what I want. Right. This is actually what real community looks like. So
yeah, exactly. And it's those things like what you were just talking about is those people who are freaked out by that. I mean, I know I was. For the longest time, like nobody is born just like, hey, this is me, this is all of me, right? That's something that takes practice and takes commitment to do, right? And you, being a pastor in the Pacific Northwest, have an extra hard job in that just the culture that you are in, just where the Lord has you, does not facilitate that type of mentality well. It really doesn't. Like we in the Pacific Northwest, we're in a church hurt culture. We're in a celebrity pastor culture. We're in a culture where it is very individualistic, where we don't feel as if we need anybody. We're in a culture where it's kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, keep your head down, look at your phone, and don't talk to anybody. Right? We're a very self-sufficient culture out here in the Pacific Northwest. So how do you, as a pastor, with all of that going on and those type of people coming in with those kind of struggles, how do you go about facilitating and encouraging service and getting plugged into that community like you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if you call people to submit and to truth like right off the bat, that's when they run. I mean, basically that idea of like trust us is not something that most people are going to like. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, okay.
And so, but I think for pastors to recognize that, like as you're working with people, like that stuff is going to take some time. And so making the front door kind of this is how we do things. You can only belong if you're going to do it this way. It's like, no, what you're doing is you're inviting people into a culture that already exists. Mm-hmm. And you're allowing them to see people. I mean, I go to the Old Testament and go, there's these sojourners among you, and they're going to see what it looks like to be the people of God by watching you be the people of God. Right. And so I think most people who end up serving, it's because they've been served. Right. I mean, if the church is really working towards that, people are going, man, I am experiencing something here that I knew I needed. That I now know I want, but that I've really never had before. And you talk about the Pacific Northwest, people are lonely. Mm-hmm. People are desperately lonely.
It's true.
And so when they can find a place that actually can see them for who they are and still wants them to be there, I think that's the sort of community that people have just not. Yeah, they haven't been part of that before.
You talked about the sojourner observing and seeing what it means and what it looks like to be part of the family of God because they're observing it in church, right? Part of that process that I think a lot of churches miss is showing the importance of how the gospel will cover over sin and how the gospel will cover over shame and pain and things like that, because so often we have the churches that are just trying to make everything look perfect. How do you think we get to that point where churches are okay with actually being authentic with the bruises and the brokenness and the scars that the gospel has covered over?
Well, I think some of it is actually working on some of our categories that we've so we basically the categories we've created are you have the broken and the sinful, and then you have the forgiven and the justified. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, and we go, yeah, that's amazing and that's beautiful, but sin still has consequences.
It does.
And so sometimes when people come in, what they're experiencing is not condemnation. What they're experiencing is people who actually recognize sin. And for people who have never acknowledged sin, that's a hard thing as well. So sometimes it's just helping people to think through kind of, I mean, it's to know all that Jesus commanded. And so the gospel is the framework by which we view all of that. But I do think even within the, kind of gospel centered grace culture, we've hijacked that. And, as Bonhoeffer said, we've made it into a cheap grace. We've turned it into something where we say the words grace all the time, but we don't really recognize the holiness of God. We don't really fear God. And actually fearing God puts you in the posture to love someone and show grace to someone who isn't repentant and isn't necessarily wanting to walk away from their sin. And I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say that is a very interesting point. I want to suss that out a little bit, because I actually, ironically, providentially, just saw a video yesterday of R.C. Sproul, and R.C. Sproul's a big holiness of God guy, right?
Yes, he is.
He was the one that really opened up my mind to, this is who God is.
Yeah.
Primarily, first and foremost, he is holy. And if we don't view him as that first, the rest of our view of God and then our practice, right, our orthopraxy after that is going to be skewed. It's going to be off kilter, right? So, and I appreciate what you said is we need to view God as holy, and we need to show that from the pulpit through our service. So how do we couple those two things? How does the viewing God as holy, how does that then transcend and affect our service and our commitment to the local church?
Yeah, I think that if we get a right view of who God is, then all of a sudden, I mean, you think of Isaiah, that's using R.C. Sproul as an example. He uses that as the central point in the holiness of God is Isaiah standing, before God in the presence of God and just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But not just overwhelmed by God, overwhelmed by his sin, by who he is. Because being in the holiness of God puts us in the position.
Lips. I'm a man of unclean lips.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And what that does when we actually understand the gospel is just makes the gospel so much greater. If we know what we have been saved from, it just makes us a thankful people. And so we start talking about what does that do to our service? Well, it means you were bought with a price. Now honor God with your body. Your whole life now is about this. And instead of kind of he rectified this little piece of my life over here, so now I can give him a little piece of my life and we're square. And so I think our service is greatly changed when we recognize what it really is that the gift of grace offers us.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. And when we realize. Yeah, that's exactly right. When we realize the depth of God's holiness, we then realize the depth of our sin, which then causes us to realize the depth of the gospel. And when we talk about service, when we talk about having this big view of God, I like to say, right?
Yeah.
We don't want a small view of God. We want a view of God that's always expanding our minds and our hearts to who he is. When we have that gives us the ability to serve well because our motives are right.
Yeah.
And when you think of both good and bad motivations for doing that, what do you find in your life that kind of creeps up as a bad motivation, perhaps even to get behind the pulpit, that you are having to fight against every week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that pastors struggle with the most is probably the duty part of it, which is just to say, I have to do this. Yeah. And it's tough because you have bad weeks as a pastor. You have times when there's things going on, or let's not minimize this. So there are times when, I have to really question, what am I able to bring this week? And what is the motivation, for why I'm here? Is it just because this is my job? Because I don't want to just keep doing this because this is what, this is the occupation I've now found myself in. But no, I mean, there's a million different, bad motivations. I mean, certainly, Francis Chan has done a good job of pointing to the crowd mentality one, where, this feeds your ego. don't ever think that it doesn't. Every time you get up on stage like this and there's all these people, there to hear you speak, man, that is a terrible thing. That is something we always have to watch out for. And not just is that the only reason I'm here, but how much of am I giving to that? How much am I allowing that to affect who I am, who I know myself to be?
What are some practical steps or practical advice, not even just for pastors, for the people that are in the congregation, to guard themselves from that mentality that kind of, I'm all that, right? Like how would you go about counseling somebody in humility, I guess?
Yeah. Well, part of it is the whole biblical idea of the church is that you're known, right? I mean, if you are actually open and known, it's hard to be humble if people actually know. I mean, it's hard to not be humble if people know who you are.
That is very true. Yeah.
I mean, it's why marriages are kind of our greatest sanctification incubator, because our spouses are the person who see us at all times. Right. They don't see us when we're on. They see us all the time. To start to create a culture that has that. To be humble, we don't have to look down on ourselves. Humility is recognizing us, actually recognizing ourselves. Sure. And so what we need is more things in our life that actually help us to see who we really are.
There's nothing better I can think of to do that than what you said, investment in the local church, right? And get in a discipleship relationship with one of your pastors or with an older guy in the church, right? Get into the small groups, the community groups, be serving in church, plug in, make your entire life as much as you can about investing into the community that God has given you in your local church, and they will hold you accountable. It'll just happen. It will.
Yeah. In a way you probably don't even recognize too. I mean, it's interesting to me. So I moved from here to the Chicago area to go to college. And when I was out there, I'm in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And so it's just, there's no kind of town feel to it. And so my relatives live just up in Wisconsin. They live in this town, and one of them was telling me how terrible the town is because everybody knows you. And so like if your car is parked outside the wrong house, they know that you're probably in there having an affair, or like that sort of thing. And so in the northwest suburbs, that didn't exist. And I worked at a coffee shop, and this one guy who came in all the time with his he always came in with this gal, and they had coffee, and they, sitting over in the corner and make out, which was kind of awkward, but
slightly,
just a little bit. But one time he came in the evening. I was actually working a different shift, and he walked in, and he had a different gal with him, more appropriate to his age, and he introduced me to his wife.
Oh no!
And I was sitting there going, "Wow, like you're even going to the same coffee shop." But like I started to realize, like,
brazen.
Yeah, but that. There's something that's built into community that actually, I mean, we always think of shame as a bad thing. Shame can be a great motivator to actually help us to recognize what our sin really is. Yeah. Because when we can't get away with something, or we know what kind of consequences that it has, it kind of exploits and reveals the true heart and nature of that sin. And so the church community is the same thing. When all of a sudden you're like, I don't want to do that because I don't want to have to tell this person about it, or I don't want to do this because this person will catch me. Like that as much as we'd rather it be a heart motivation, that's actually, though, protects us from quite a bit. And it's a wonderful thing that I think we minimize that aspect. And I'll just say one more thing. It's interesting to me with the celebrity pastor thing you were talking about before. If you look at all those cases, every single one of those guys isolated themselves.
Yes.
I mean, that is the one thing that you see with all of them is they built up a system by which not just they weren't accountable to anybody else, but they actually had almost no community. They had pulled themselves back further and further and further. And so we see there the results of what happens when you don't have that.
The 3 stages of pride. It's pride blinds, pride alienates, then pride destroys. Right. And it always happens there. Right. And it's that alienation that you're talking about. That is when it's so dangerous. Because you know what's coming, right? And it's just you're sitting there with the red flags, like stop, the road is out, the bridge is out, you are careening toward disaster, and if you have nobody around you to tell you that, you're gonna go flying off that bridge, and and it's going to be a bad crash.
Yeah, and the thing for all of us to recognize is when we look at those sorts of things, people go, "Oh, that was a prideful man," and it's like, the reality is we all are. But by the grace of God go I. And so we should invest in that grace of God that he has given us in the local church.
Which is the church. Yeah.
Yes.
To be clear.
Yes. Rather than thinking like, that guy couldn't handle it, but I can because I have a different personality. It's not, right. That's not going to, your personality is not going to save you.
I'm an Enneagram 2, so I can handle that better than the Enneagram 4s.
Yes, right? Exactly. You got it down.
So much, yeah.
That's a whole other conversation.
We're gonna leave that one. We're gonna leave that one right where it's at. Yeah,
please.
That's just separate. Oh my goodness. All right. Jim. So obviously, being in ministry for as long as you have, growing up in the church, we've all got those stories, right? We've got the unforgettable moments. We've got the hilarious things that happen to us. What is one of the most funniest or unforgettable church moments you have ever experienced?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of awkward ones. We
even better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're in an area where we have a lot of homeless people walk into the church service. So when I was younger, I grew up in the Paedo-Baptist tradition. Dumping water on children is always exciting and brings out the best in them. But
have you seen? I gotta ask you real quick because on the topic of Paedo-Baptism, if you haven't seen it, I'm sending it to you. Have you seen the short? It's like a 15-second video clip of like the Russian Paedo-Baptists where they're holding
the babies.
Oh my goodness! He dunks them like three, like Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Yeah. Totally submerged head first into the water tin.
People always say you can't do a hybrid model, but I mean that's pretty close.
That is definitely baptism by immersion.
Yes.
Yeah, that baby was fully submerged 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They're not taking any chances on that one.
No, that baby is coming out sanctified.
Yeah. What I was going to say though is we had one situation though where a family came and they had a baby, but then they also had like a 4 or 5-year-old. And the kid had never been in service before, and they were new to the church. And so, but the church, because they had always done, baby baptisms, didn't think, hey, we should probably put this at the beginning of the service so that we can get this family out of here, because the babies tend to sit well enough when they're, a few months old. So this kid, again, never been in service. He was going to be baptized as well. And he just did laps around the church for the entire service, up around the podium, and the pastor was doing his best to ignore it and to try to be gracious to this family and pretend that but about halfway through his sermon, he lost it. And basically somebody get the kid out, You can bring it back. So
where's the deacons? Get somebody help. Somebody grab that child.
Yeah, I think it was so outside of what they'd ever experienced. They were just kind of no one knew what to do. So
they were the frozen chosen. Right? And they're just like, what's happening here?
Well, seriously. But the other part of it is, I mean, for some of us, it was entertaining, so we could have done something. But
you're
we were enjoying the show. Yeah,
you're sitting there waiting, how long is it going to be till this pastor snaps? Yeah.
Or he actually went up at one point. He was playing in the baptism water, he was splashing it around and stuff. And you're sitting there going, who's going to do something? Is somebody going to do something?
Yeah, because if we don't, I'm afraid that God is going to here really soon.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Well, Jim, we are almost done with the podcast, but not yet. We have come to the Monday hot takes, which is when I ask you a bunch of random questions and you give me the first thing that pops into your head. You ready for these?
Yeah, theological Rorschach test. Let's go.
Yeah, that's I'm not stuck in here with you. You're stuck in here with me.
You do edit this later on, right?
Oh yeah, I can, but depends on how good. I like to be edit light. Yeah.
Okay.
Edit light. All right, we're gonna start off easy. All right.
Okay.
What's the worst book you've ever read?
Worst book I ever read. I don't remember the title. It's by Joel Rosenberg, and it's like a prophetic. Every time the word Judah is ushered in the minor prophets, it actually refers to America.
Oh, so some sort of dispensational garbage, right?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's see. Favorite band or musical artist?
Radiohead, no question.
Holy smokes. Okay, good. Nice. All right, pulling that out. All right, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
All right. Jim, I haven't asked this for a while because nobody's actually given me an answer yet, but you seem like the guy who's going to give me an answer.
I have opinions.
I know you, yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. Okay. If you could send 3 people in a rocket up to space with the with the knowledge that they are not coming back.
Oh.
Who are these 3 people that you are just getting out of here?
Only 3, huh?
I love it. That's the best answer I've gotten so far.
Sorry.
Yes. I
That's a
knew
tough
you were going to
one.
be the guy to do this.
That's a tough one. Clay Bennett.
Okay.
So for people who don't know, he is the one who bought the Sonics and moved them to Oklahoma City.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll say Bart Ehrman, just because I cannot stand anything that man puts out. For those who don't know, he is the professor of New Testament at North Carolina State, but he actually hates God and he tries to draw Christians away.
Well, there we go. All right.
And but he's very effective at it, which is what makes him especially frustrating. Bono. And I don't want to have to give the reasons for it. We'll just leave it at that.
What's right? You still haven't found what you're looking for? Like, what's
I found what I'm looking for, and it has nothing to do with him. That's the thing.
You didn't like his commentary on the Psalms that he put out a while ago? You didn't like that? That wasn't your thing, huh?
I feel that he is not one of the worst 3 people on earth. Don't get me wrong, but there's a certain way that he can get under my skin.
Unlike anyone else.
That most people who wear sunglasses indoors cannot. So.
It's so true. Oh, I love it. Oh, Jim, thank you, sir. You have done what others could not. Okay, which just proves you were just as cynical as I am, which is okay. That's why we got people around us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you could be a member of any TV sitcom, which one would it be?
Yeah, it would have to be something, with a good, Ryan Reynolds' character from Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza. This is throwback. Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place. When I was in college, a couple of my friends were like, "Oh my word, that guy and you, it's a similar personality." So, we'll go with that because no one knows what I'm talking about.
All right. In what situation or place would you find yourself most out of place in?
I find myself most out of place in situations where people are trying to impress one another.
Okay, Jim, what is one of the craziest or most out of character things you have ever done?
Craziest or out of character thing? I am massively risk averse, and yet I planted a church. But I also used to go cliff jumping quite a bit with my friends.
Okay.
And so it took me a while to actually work up the courage to do that. But then, that certainly was not in my wheelhouse. But
okay,
it's fun.
What's the best way to spend a rainy afternoon? Because you get a lot of them.
There are a lot of rainy afternoons around here. Cup of coffee and a good book.
There you go.
Can't beat it.
You can't beat it. Good man. What's your least favorite mode of transportation?
Segway.
A Segway? Have you done a Segway?
I have.
I've got the mental picture now.
Okay, so
you on a Segway.
So here's the problem. Most of the things that are made for fits all sizes goes up to about 6'4". So anything like that,
are you having to bend over to reach the bars?
I either bend over or just kind of hold it low, So it's
or
not good.
Your butt sticking out
it's bad. It's no matter how you frame it. It's not good.
You look like those guys at the carnivals that are on stilts.
Yeah.
Just gliding along. Oh, there's Jim. It's Jim.
Yeah.
Look. Like a raptor, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny. Okay, hey, what food do you wish was health food so you could eat it all the time?
Hamburger and French fries all day long.
Oh, there you go.
All day long.
There you
yeah.
go. Now, are you a thick burger or are you a smash burger guy?
I'm a thick burger guy.
Thick burger guy? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Have you ever walked out of a theater because the movie was so bad?
I have. When I was in college, we used to pay for one movie and then jump theaters all day long.
Yes.
So it was the third movie in the day, and I don't even remember the title of it, but it was a Jason Statham one where he was driving cars fast and whatever, and it was so terrible.
Like, hold on, a Jason Statham movie where he's driving cars fast. That's literally every Jason Statham movie.
That's why I can't remember which one it was, because I could go on to IMDb and go, okay, wait, it was him, and then it would not help me. I would not be able to remember what movie it was.
That's awesome. And what is your go-to karaoke song?
I tend to not karaoke by myself, so I'll invite other people in, and then you got to go Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen and do parts.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
you can throw your voice all over the place, and people are like, "This is amazing," and it's like it's really not, but it works. It works.
It works. It does work. Oh man, that's awesome. Well, looking forward to seeing that someday. That'll be great. Well, hey Jim, we have come to the end of the program. I appreciate you being on the podcast with me, man. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey everyone, you guys know the drill. You can head on over to iTunes and leave a raving review and a 5-star rating. Please, it gets the word out, and only raving reviews will be accepted. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Music, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. Head on over to facebook.com/everydaymonday podcast for just all of the information. Instagram at everydaymonday pod. Thank you all for joining us in the trenches today, and we will catch you on the next step of Every Day a Monday.